Voice, and I'm here today with Natasha Swift, who's a local business owner, and she's going to tell us all about what she does. So Natasha, who's sometimes called Tasha for short, thank you for coming today to talk to me. I'm really pleased. So would you like to tell the audience about yourself and what you do, Tasha, please?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. So I do integrative counselling, which means I work from a person-centred base, and I integrate other approaches when it feels appropriate or when the client mentions that they're looking for a certain approach. So that can cover cognitive behavioural tools, solution-focused tools, and also like trauma work. So there's lots of different elements, work with spirituality, lots of different things like that. So
sorry, you sound very talented there with all these things that you can offer. Would you like to just explain? I know a little bit about these different things, but some of our audience viewers might not do. Do you want to just explain a little bit more about the different things that you do that you've just mentioned?
Yeah, so my baseline is person-centered, and that's basically where the client can come and talk about what's brought them to counselling, what they're struggling with, you know, any ruminative thoughts that they're having, any anxiety, any depression, whatever it might be that's coming up. And it's basically a space for them to explore that, and for me to almost be like a mirror to show them what they're showing me, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And then yeah, and then let them sort of unpack it. So like I'll go, oh, you've just said this, that feels like it's really important. Should we look at that? And usually they say yes, and it'll prompt another thought or feeling, and it'll unpack that way. And sometimes through that process, well, not sometimes, quite often through that process, the client can end up saying things that indicates things to me that they're not aware of, or they're not completely in control of. And I can go, oh, you said this, and you know, I'm noticing that's, you know, you know, jumping down on yourself, putting yourself down, or there's a belief system there. And sometimes it's not what they've said. Sometimes it's an instinct that I feel, that they're feeling, I don't know, lost or trapped, or like there's in relationships and love and things like that. When people struggle with that, there tends to be like a void that they can feel deep inside. If they could reach into the body, it would be deep inside, like just under the ribs, where they could pull it out if they could, and it's stuck there. And usually it's a feeling that I get that I can offer back to them. So this is what I'm getting from you. And usually they'll either say yes, and that'll progress, or they'll say no, and I'm like, okay, well, let's revisit it. And it tends to bring out new information for them that they wouldn't have considered otherwise. And that's why person-centered can be really, really fruitful in the therapeutic sense, because it's quite gentle whilst also helping somebody to unpack something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. As I say, I know a little bit about it. As you know, I do coaching as well, and there is some similarity. I know it's not the same. You know, and I wouldn't profess to be a counsellor. I'm not. Yes, that was really good. You also mentioned some other things that you did. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah. So when it is appropriate, when I notice certain things, and this is quite often because the way I work is I would like to help people to figure out the tools that they need for the here and now. What are they struggling with, and what do they want out of counselling going forward? So let's create almost a toolkit for them to use, whether it's understanding their energy levels, understanding what boundaries they need for themselves and others, you know, how to cope with their anxiety, how to figure out why they're feeling what they're feeling, and sort of like indicators that they need to self-care and not do something that they used to do that contributed to depression or whatever it was. And so I work in a way that we want to help the person find solutions to that going forward, whilst also helping them to unpack what's the root cause. Why is this occurring? Because if we don't unpack the root cause, they might be able to cope with this anxiety over here, But then once they've learnt those tools, because the root cause hasn't been dealt with, they'll end up with something else going on over here, like another type of I don't know if you want to say mental health disorder or however you'd like to term it. And so that's why I like to do both of those things, which is why integrative work is so important to do, in my opinion. And so that's why I like to use cognitive behavioral tools and solution-focused tools. Solution-focused comes from cognitive behavioral therapy. It's like a branch off that's used to help somebody in a positive way, find positive interventions of their own making. And I would help them guide to find those within themselves where they go, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what the solution is. And it's my job to guide them to find those solutions. And it is very powerful the way it works. Whereas cognitive behavioral therapy, it's helping somebody to understand the mechanisms of what's going on not just in the mind, but in the body, and the connection between the two. Like anxiety, we have physical responses, don't we, to anxiety as well as the mental. And
Absolutely.
so it's about helping them to understand those process and, you know, how the brain goes into certain pathways that contributes to our behavior, and then that behavior contributes to our thoughts and our feelings. It's like a cycle. And so this can really help the person to really unpack what's going on and go forward without going back to it in future. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't need to go back to counselling in the future as and when required, but it does mean that over time that the person would hopefully get much more out of it than just being in long-term therapy feeling like they didn't get anywhere and like it's the same ground. Hopefully through the process of integrative work, we can start to bridge that gap and find that every time they have to come to therapy, if they even do, they might unpack everything in the first set of therapy, that they feel like they've got somewhere with it, and that every time it's solidified and the lessons go deeper and they feel more empowered and more in control.
Yes, I can certainly relate to a lot of the things that you're saying, because there are some similarities in relation to some techniques that I use with my clients. As I say, I'm not a counsellor though. You also mentioned other things before, things like spirituality. How does that sort of link in with your counselling work?
Yeah, so I work with it. So whatever anybody brings, I'll work with essentially. And often spirituality can be one of those things. A lot of people I'm seeing at the minute struggle with feeling fulfilled in their lives. And they're searching for something, and sometimes it is spirituality that comes into it. Whereas also other people, if they're not in that bracket, it's that they already have a faith base and they're scared to bring it into the therapy room for judgment, or because they don't realize how important that is in their life and how they can apply that to everything. And so it's about integrating that in the work we do to help the person find solutions that are theirs to keep. Because what's super powerful about that is that it comes from them, it comes from their motivators and the things that they find meaning in, which means it is more powerful than me just saying, well, I think this and I think you should do this and this is a good tool. And it's about bridging, okay, this is a good tool, but what does that mean to you? And does that fit in with your belief system and what your spiritualism is? So there's that element. But also my journey into this has had a lot to do with spirituality. And me, myself, I am into like, you know, spiritual, pagan type things. And in a loose way, you know, like in a way of flexibility and I don't know everything about that, you know, and I don't think any of us do, you know, we're humans having this experience. And so I've really had to lean into that in my life. And so I find it very easy now to just sit back and let people be who they are. And that makes life a lot easier because we're not battling all the time. And then because of that, I can sit with people in wherever they're at. And so it overlaps in different ways.
I suppose part of that as well is like accepting other people might have different beliefs than you, and not, you know, allowing them to express those beliefs and not feel like they're being judged or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
big time, really
Really
big
interesting.
time.
Yeah. So would you say that you offer a counselling service and you bring all these other aspects into it if required, or would you say that you offer a variety of different services? Would somebody come to you and then you would decide how you would treat, for want of a better word, that person, or would they come to you for a specific thing?
So what tends to happen is I look at the person as a whole. It's nothing that I do is branched into different sections, or I'll treat you with this and I'll treat you with that. What I find is everything has layers. And it's about helping that person to get to know themselves and what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And so a client will come in and I'll do my first 10-15 minutes with them about what I'm able to offer them, confidentiality, all of that sort of stuff. And then I'll offer them, okay, now's your space to tell me what's brought you to counselling. And usually they'll have so much pent up that it'll just all come out and they won't know where to start. But then once they start talking, the first thing that comes to mind, it'll just unravel from there. And I'll pick up different things and be like, I'm noticing this, I'm noticing that. And so it happens very naturally that I'll be like, okay, you've said this and you've said that. This feels important. So it could be tools. You're experiencing this tool could be helpful, but I'm also noticing that this is really important to you. So if they are spiritual and have a faith base, I've worked with a few people who follow Christianity, and so they've gone, this is really important to me, and I've gone, right, let's work with that. You know, they're judging themselves so much. It's like, well, okay, Jesus means so much to you. What do you think Jesus would say to that? Because it helps them to start to bring in compassion to themselves in a space where they wouldn't have been able to do that otherwise. And the faith teaches that. And that means that has meaning. And so that's sort of how it happens. It happens very holistically.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter that you might believe something else. It's what's important to the client that, you know, you can use that to help them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Would you say that you have a particular niche market or not with all these different things that you do?
Yeah, I guess. So I work with anything. I'm happy to work with anything. However, my knowledge base is very extensive when it comes to eating disorders and working with men in therapy. So eating disorders, my knowledge is so extensive because that was my path into counselling. That was my experience as a young adult and a teen, and even going into adulthood in my early 20s. And so that's why I have such an extensive knowledge of it, because I went through the therapy. And then that was when I recovered, that was when I decided to go into counselling myself. And a lot of the modules I did were on like CBT, and a lot of the essays and stuff I had to write, I applied to CBT for eating disorders. And so my knowledge around that is quite extensive, both from a professional and a personal standpoint. And so I feel like, as far as niche market's concerned, that would be my niche. But I do work with anything, and I enjoy working with anything, to be honest. Like I see the person. It just so happens that I have that extensive knowledge in that area. And with working with men in therapy, that the same applies there as well. Obviously, I'm not a man. That experience.
I was just going to ask about not about whether you're a man, about why you said you tend to work with men, if there was a reason for that, or you know.
Yeah, so I'm really passionate about working with men and men getting the help that they need. And the reason for that is because I feel like, aside from all of the stigma and us doing all this awareness around it's okay for men to talk as well, I have, and this is potentially going to ruffle a few feathers for some people, I feel like a lot of the world problems really wouldn't be problems if we were there for men. You know, I feel like men get blamed a lot, you know, especially at the minute. There seems to be a thing about, you know, middle-aged white men, and it really, really annoys me, because I just think they're human as well, you know. And how did they get to whatever space that they're in, whether it's being wounded and feeling like they don't have a voice and then being very timid and then being accused of not being a real man, or whether it be the extreme of, you know, domestic abuse and being quite violent because of how angry they are. Well, how did each of those people get there? And often it's from the same root causes, which is childhood neglect or abuse, or these standards and stigmas that we put on young men from a very young age. Women have women's version, and I'm very passionate about the fact that it isn't that one gender has it worse. It's that they each have their own set of issues, and some of those issues overlap. And I feel like men get missed because they're demonized. But actually, I feel like if we met them where they are, as that child that's still inside them, that didn't get those needs met, that wasn't taught how to deal with their emotions, and that is still continually shamed as an adult, I feel like a lot of the issues that not only they're experiencing, but women are experiencing as a result. And then obviously the tension between men and women in society of this weird battle of the sexes type thing. I feel like a lot of those issues would resolve naturally. You know, if we all had emotional intelligence, would we be abusing each other the extent that we do? Because women are just as guilty. We just do it in a different way.
You've obviously thought a lot about this. It obviously means quite a lot to you, and
yeah,
that's really good that you're making such a difference for these men. So if a woman came to ask for help, would you work with a woman as well? It's not exclusively men that you work with?
No. Oh no, not at all. I like to work with a variety of people on a variety of topics. Like, ultimately counselling is about meeting somebody, another human being, where they're at. It doesn't matter who they are, what they present like. It's about meeting somebody in the space that they're in and saying, I'm here and let's do this together.
Okay, so moving on from that, but related to that, so there might be somebody watching this that's, you know, is impressed by what you're saying and might sort of relate to you, and might have wanted to go somewhere for help because they've got a particular issue, whatever that might be, but they're perhaps a bit nervous about approaching somebody. What would you say to them?
Sometimes with seeking out help, sometimes we have to get to a point of being fed up, of feeling fed up, before we have the ability to break through that fear of reaching out. What I would say is, it's very easy for me to say here right now and say to them, sometimes you just have to make that phone call and just do it. You know, you're anxious, acknowledge, I feel anxious, and focus on each step. So you type the number in. If that's as far as you get that day, that's okay. You've made progress in seeking out that support. Save the number for another time. And then when you have the energy, perhaps you can have a look at that number and consider ringing. If you can't ring, send a text. You know, a lot of people find it easier just to text, I need help, and then maybe I would then ring. But it's up to the person if they answer, you know. If they don't answer, I can't help. And so it sort of comes down to, are you going to give yourself the opportunity to get the help that's available? Because ultimately it's the individual that can make that choice, and whether or not they're ready is up to them. And like I said, it's being sick and tired of feeling sick and tired can often be the breakthrough. And people tend to come to counselling when they're desperate. And this is why it's frustrating with a lot of the waiting lists in, you know, the health service, because people are desperate. By the time they've made that phone call, they've already got to breaking point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would take it step by step, and every time you make one step towards, even if you don't complete that action, it's still a step in the right direction. But if it's easier just to send a text, send the text.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks for that. It could be that somebody's watching this and they might use your services in the future. You know, they remember this video, or somebody that knows that they want to seek out, you know, a service that you can offer, might be inspired to do so by watching this. So
yeah,
you mentioned about ringing or or sending you a text? Are they the best ways to get in touch with you?
Yeah, usually. I have occasionally had connectivity issues because of where I live. So if I don't get back within 24 hours, I'd say, send me an email, because I'll always be checking my emails all the time. I think another thing to mention as well is that contemplation is an actual stage in the cycle of seeking help as a cycle, and that we go through. And that contemplation stage, it's different for everybody. I know when I went to therapy for the first time, it took me 2 weeks from the time that I got given the number to ring it, because I don't know, because the anxiety around it,
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's texting, there's phone calls, and also emails. Again, yeah, if I don't ring back or text back within 24 hours, email's a good place to start.
Okay, and what's your email address?
My email address is all lowercase. It's nrswift94@gmail.com.
Okay, and that we can always sort of make a note of that, when we promote the video. So it's been really good what you're saying, and I know loads of people will be able to benefit from what you do. Do you offer services online, or are they face-to-face, or is it a mixture of both?
So I can do both. I can do Zoom video calls for online, or telephone counselling. I'd say telephone counselling is the least effective, because body language is really important.
Yeah,
it's the main way we communicate is non-verbal.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and also being able to see the person and read the facial cues and stuff, it's really beneficial to the therapeutic process. But obviously not everybody is technologically able. And I do have a face-to-face counselling room in Pilling in Preston, sort of like towards Garstang and Lancaster way.
Okay. Yeah.
So it could be face-to-face, it could be online, or it could be telephone.
Yeah, so you're quite sort of, obviously we're Preston based, Preston's Voice. Most of our volunteers live in or around Preston, so we like to promote local businesses particularly. So you're not that far away, so a lot of people will be able to get to Pilling. It's not that far, is it really? That's really good. But if they can't and they're able to use, say, is it Zoom that you use, or video conferencing to be able to conduct sessions? That's really good. Is there anything, before I ask my final question to you, is there anything else that you want to tell us that we've not touched on, perhaps about anything different, or add more to what you've said about what you do?
So a couple of things. I think the first is that I do have a YouTube channel, and on Mondays I do Mental Health Mondays, where I do teach and explore certain concepts, counselling tools, solution focus tools, CBT tools, all of this sort of stuff. At the minute, I'm doing lots of videos around the tools aspect and self-development, but I do plan on doing other topics around discussing, mental health disorders, whether or not to get a diagnosis, certain stigmas around counsellors themselves, and lots of different topics really. But at the minute I'm focused on that because there's a lot of people struggling at the minute, and I'm aware there's a lot of people that are struggling to afford therapy whilst being desperate for it.
Yeah, definitely. Are they live streams, the YouTube videos, or are they recorded videos, on these subjects?
The recorded videos. So I pre-record them. If anybody has any requests, they can make requests, and I'll do a video. I think the only thing to take away from that, though, is to say that if you are in desperation, while the videos can be helpful, obviously when we start deep diving into the things that we find challenging, it can be like opening a can of worms.
Yeah.
And if we're in the middle of a crisis, that can actually be quite dangerous when we're on our own without the support. And so I would like to just make people mindful of that. Obviously, they can reach out to me if they're really struggling and just need a one-off session. I do have a waiting list for free counselling. I can only see 2 people a week for free. just because I can't. Obviously, I'm just one person, but I do try to offer that a little bit, just because it's giving back a little bit, and it's a balance, you know, between also trying to keep myself going and paying the bills.
Yeah, well, it's really good that you can offer the 2 free sessions a week.
Yeah, I do currently have 2 people that are taking up those sessions at the minute. So it's going to be at least, I'd say, the end of January before any more sessions become available.
Okay. So it's not just like 1 free session per person. You might get somebody and they carry on working with you for free, possibly.
Yeah, so I offer 6 free sessions initially, and that can end up being extended, because if someone's done 6 sessions and they need another 4 to be safe and to solidify the work we've done up to then, and that bridges the gap while they're waiting for other free services, then we'll do that. And so that's why it's like I can't give an exact time. I can only give a rough time.
Because it's all individual, isn't it?
Yeah.
Person's needs. Yeah.
And I think the other thing I'd want to mention before you ask your last question is that, you know, when I say things about men and women and stuff, one of the things I think it'll ruffle is for people who have experienced domestic violence, especially if that was a woman and it was done by a man. And I think the reason I feel like it's important to mention this for the purposes of helping people to understand why I have these opinions is that these aren't opinions that are just formed from a professional standpoint, or a political one for that matter. You know, I have experienced it myself twice. I've had 2 abusive relationships, because that's the cycle of abuse. That's how it works, is you become vulnerable for whatever reason, and somebody finds that and they manipulate, because, you know, they might be narcissistic or whatever terms you want to use, or they might have wounds that make them act in a certain way. And then you know, if you don't heal that before you get into another relationship, you are vulnerable for it to happen again, more likely, because those types of people seek out those kinds of people. And so I'm not saying these things from a place of ignorance or, you know, anything like that. I don't know what people come up with, but it's from a place of deep reflection. Like you said, it has been a lot of because of my own healing journey, and reflecting, why are these things happening, and why are these things getting worse, and what we're doing wrong, because there's a massive push for these things to be dealt with, and yet it's getting worse. Why is that? And sometimes the reasons are uncomfortable to acknowledge.
Yeah, I can see that you really think about these things, and like you said, it's your opinion, and it's based on what you've experienced. So you come across as very authentic in your beliefs, and, you know, what you want to help people with. That's really good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say about your YouTube channel, or anything else related to that, or anything?
I mean, yeah, as opposed to the mental health stuff, sorry about my dogs barking. Aside from the mental health side of YouTube, I do also do what we call Witchy Wednesdays, which is all things spirituality. It doesn't have to be like pagan type stuff. It can also be anything to do with spirituality in general, because my beliefs are very flexible, you know, and I'm not opposed to challenging myself with that sometimes. And so it's all stuff to do with that, what I believe. There's a lot of stigmas around paganism and what it is. You know, it's not Satan worship or anything like that. In fact, far from it. Don't even believe in the devil. And so it's about helping people to understand what exactly it is, and what do we believe, and how does it look, whilst also incorporating other aspects of spirituality. Thursdays, I do Holistic Thursdays, where I talk about, you know, the whole person, their health, their well-being in general. Sometimes I have people on talking about their businesses from a holistic standpoint, and that can be anything from spiritual practices like Reiki and energy work, but it's also about the basics, like, you know, physical health, fitness, diet, the routines we have in our daily life. For example, at the minute, working from home, I'd say for the majority of people that's really unhealthy. And I know there'll be a few people go, I really enjoy working from home because I can fit.
I'm probably one of those.
Yeah. Well, I would argue, well, actually, you might be fitting more stuff in, so you might like it, but how much more stressed might you be? Or how much more tired are you? Or in another 2 years' time, are you going to burn out faster? Because is everything in balance in your life right now? You know, is it healthy to work? For example, I do a lot of work from my bedroom because that's the only space I've got at the minute. Unfortunately, I'm working on that. And it's not really healthy to do. You need a specific space for
Yeah,
work, ideally.
yeah. I'm lucky that I do work from home a lot of the time, but I'm in a spare room, so it's not actually the bedroom. So I do feel I'm in an office. It's like an office spare room. So
it helps bridge that gap.
Yeah. That's good. Anything else you want to add before I ask you the last question?
Not anything that feels relevant to today. No.
Okay, that's fine. So what I wanted to ask you, for Preston's Voice, we're all about sort of positivity, because there's a lot of sort of doom and gloom in the news at the moment, as I'm sure you're well aware. So we just wondered if you've got any kind of positive message for our viewers, you know, that might be feeling a bit down, or just in general to help people.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is that people often ask me how I've ended up being so resilient. When I've talked to people about, obviously I've talked briefly about my sort of story, if you will, but there's a lot more to it. And I went through a lot at a very young age. And I think people often look at me and go, how did you end up being so resilient? And so I think the thing is, resilience grows, and the least resistance we have against the things that make us uncomfortable, and the more we look at them rather than avoid them, the easier it can be. For example, when we want to apologize to somebody, but we're being stubborn about it because that feels uncomfortable to apologize and admit that we were wrong. It's about allowing yourself that flexibility. And equally on that wavelength, I would say, if something negative has happened, how can you reframe it? There's always mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, you know. It doesn't matter how.
We're all human, aren't we?
Yeah. And we have this lifetime to live, and we're not perfect, and that's actually a good thing, you know. And so it's, how can you reframe any mistakes that you've made? How can you learn from them and go forward in a positive manner rather than just beating yourself up? You know, why did I do that then? Right, this is why. I understand why I did it. This is what I was feeling. This is what I was thinking. What can I take from it? What would I like to do differently? What's the lesson? And just run with the lesson and let the rest fall away.
That's really good. It's all about learning from experience, isn't it? Which is something that I'm keen on, and about not beating yourself up over things that you might class as mistakes. You know, not having, like, you might regret doing something, but you can't change it if it's in the past. So it's about not sort of living your life sort of beating yourself up about it and moving forward. So that is really, really good. So I've enjoyed talking to you today, Tasha, and you've been a great person to interview. I've met you a couple of times now in person, and we've had a previous video session. So thank you for agreeing for this interview today. It's been really good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. You're welcome.